지금부터
From now on,
2022년
we would like to now start the Session 4 Inter-Korean Cooperation Plan for Joint Response to Environmental and Natural Disasters out of the KGFP Korea Global Forum for Peace. First of all, I'd like to now give you the introduction of the presenters as well as discussants. As I call their names, I would like to ask them to stand up a little and show their wave. Now we have Professor Kim Byung-no of Institute of Peace and Unification Studies. We also invited two presenters, Dr. Myung-soo Jung of Korea Environment Institute, Dr. Na Yong-woo, Korea Institute for National Unification is here. We now have three discussants. We have Dr. Thomas Wieczorowski from Hankuk University of Foreign Studies, Dr. Yoo Jae-shim from Environmental Planning Institute of Seoul National University, Dr. Oh Il-suk from Institute for National Security Strategy. Thank you. Now, we would like to have Director Lee Jong-chul, South North Korea Exchange and Cooperation Support Association. Now, last but not least, I am the moderator today. My name is Park Chung-hwan from South North Korean Exchanges and Cooperation Support Association. Before we start, I would also like to ask Director Lee Jong-chul, Acting Chairman of South North Korea Exchanges and Cooperation Support Association, to give us a welcoming remark. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I am Lee Jong-chul, Director and Acting President of South North Korea Exchanges and Cooperation Support Association. Very nice to see you. Welcome to this session of the Inter-Korean Cooperation Plan for Joint Response to Environmental and Natural Disasters for 2022 KGFP Korea Global Forum for Peace. I'd like to express my gratitude to all the people who are joining us online despite their schedules for supporting us and keeping the interest up. My thanks should also go to Dr. Kim Byung-ro, Associate Professor of Seoul National University from Institute for Peace and Unification Studies, Dr. Myung-soo Jung, Research Fellow of Korea Environment Institute, Dr. Na Yong-woo from Korea Institute for National Unification. We also have our discussants, Dr. Thomas Wieczorowski, Dr. Yoo Jae-shim, and Dr. Oh Il-sung, each from Hankuk University of Foreign Studies, Environmental Planning Institute, and Institute for National Security Strategy, respectively. I should not forget to mention my gratitude to all the participants here today. As we all know, we had very big flood flash in some areas of Seoul and Pyongyang within our Korean peninsula, having the 1/3 of the annual rainfall. You are also familiar with the cases in Pakistan, losing more than 1,100 people, including several hundreds of children. Likewise, we are witnessing all the effect of climate changes and the disasters afterwards. It is very difficult to stop the occurrence of these disasters. However, our tough preparedness will minimize the impact. So it is only necessary for North and South Korea to have the response system together to have the better preparedness for such natural disasters and environmental damage. Therefore, we are here today to talk about how we can cooperate together jointly to the environmental issues and natural disasters. Through the presentations and discussions of the experts renowned in and outside Korea, we will be able to have the constructions as well as the discussions that we can have the detente and restoration of our trust. I'd like to also extend my warmest wish to your health and luck. Thank you very much.
이제부터는 Now I'm going to turn over the microphone to Kim Byung-ro, Professor Kim Byung-ro. Good afternoon. I am Kim Byung-ro, Professor of the Institute for Peace and Unification Studies of the Seoul National University. As you know, globally, climate change is posing a very serious threat to all of us, and also we are vulnerable to frequent flood as well as drought. Recently, earlier, the Chairman Kim Jong-un defined the natural disaster as one of the three major crises, which include the war, infectious disease, and the natural disaster. So this indicates that North Korea also puts a lot of importance on the management of natural disaster, and this has become escalated in the national agenda. Yoon Seok-yeol government, in order to overcome natural disaster, has also proposed the inter-Korean cooperation to seek for co-prosperity between the two Koreas. And so if you look at Korea, South and North Korea, the cooperation for the natural disaster control is critically required, and we have higher possibility than before for having cooperation. However, as you may be well aware, we have very strained relations nowadays with North Korea. So overcoming these stumbling blocks and how to create the space for cooperation, this is something that we have to muster our wisdom together and find a way forward. So I hope that in North Korea, in its pursuit of its own prosperity, they could respond to our gesture for cooperation. And in this regard, I think that this kind of forum is very important. And in this regard, we have the 5 experts in this forum, including presenters and discussants. So for each presenter and discussant, I would like to ask you I'm going to introduce them when they make presentation. So the first presenter is Dr. Myung-soo Jung, and she graduated from the New York State University. She got her PhD there, and currently she's working as the Chief Research Fellow of the Korea Environment Institute. She's an expert in the Inter-Korean Disaster Control Project. And I would like to give 20 minutes to each presenter for the presentation and 7 minutes for each discussant. Now, Dr. Myung, please start your presentation. Good afternoon. As introduced, I am Myung-soo Jung from the Korea Environment Institute. Today, I would like to talk about the environmental disasters on the Korean Peninsula and the tasks for inter-Korean cooperation. So I will first talk about environmental disaster and the Korean Peninsula and North Korea's environmental disaster. Then I'm going to conclude my presentation by talking about the areas of cooperation to respond to environmental disaster. Let me first touch upon environmental disaster, the first topic. Before we talk about the environmental disaster, we have to think about the scope and the ranges of the natural disasters. So in South Korea, we have a basic law on the management of natural disasters, and it actually divides disasters into 2 categories, natural disaster and social disaster. Natural disaster includes the typhoon, the flood, heavy wind, and so on. And even the asterisk and also the objects from the space is also included in the scope of the natural disaster. Whereas the social disaster, it includes the fire, infectious disease, environmental pollution accident, traffic accident, as well as the air pollution due to PM. So this is how South Korea divides the disasters. And we have the basic law on the management of the natural disaster. In North Korea, they have the disaster prevention and recovery law where they define the meaning of natural disaster, which includes the flood, earthquake, tsunami, and so on. And aside from the natural disaster, they also have the scope for other disasters, include the destruction of the facilities and buildings, as well as the paralysis of the water system, environmental pollution, as well as the spread of the infectious disease, including COVID pandemic. So these are all included in the other disaster category. So South and North Korea, if you look at the definition of disasters, you can see that they do have a very wide-ranging definition. And also they divide the disasters into naturally occurring disasters and anthropogenic disasters caused by human beings, like due to the facilities or the environmental pollution. And also the disasters that are caused by the environmental issues are all included in the anthropogenic disaster. So environmental disaster, as I said earlier, is caused by environmental issues and therefore having a negative impact on human life. This slide shows the distribution of natural disasters across the world, including the Korean Peninsula. It's dated in the 2017. The reason that I show the map in 2017 is because on the Korean Peninsula in year 2017, various natural disasters occurred. And so Korea is very susceptible to flood and drought, but in year 2017 we experienced the earthquake, and also across the world there were a lot of geological disasters. In Korea, however, we experienced the earthquakes in a very rare way, but in 2017 we experienced that. And usually around the population-dense cities, you can see that the damage is huge from natural disaster. What about the environmental disasters that take place frequently on the Korean Peninsula? So number one, a natural disaster. I think the first thing that comes to your mind is the hydrology-related disasters, including flood, drought, and typhoon. So here you can see the relevant photos. This is something that we frequently witness during the rainy monsoon season in the summer. So both the South and North Korea, we suffer from the inundation and flood. And as you know, this year we experienced a lot of floods. And next is the drought. And drought is not the transient event, rather it takes place very slowly at a gradual pace, and therefore it's difficult to estimate the damage caused by drought. But once it happens, then it creates a sort of the domino effect and have a very wide-ranging effect. So the flood and drought, these are the major natural disasters that Korea experiences often. Next is typhoon. We also see growing damage by typhoon, and it's because of the climate change. So the frequency and the severity of typhoon have been heightened because of climate change and has a heavy impact on North Korea. We also have environment-related disasters, and a major example is PM. Prior to the COVID pandemic, we had a deep and serious concerns about PM. And most of the PM came from the western wind, usually from China and other areas. So these air pollution has been alleviated nowadays. but still it's a very important issue for Korea. And it can cover a very broad area and cause huge negative impact. And also we have the disasters that are caused by the degradation of the water quality. One of the issues that Korea started to pay attention to for the environmental disaster was that there was an inflow of the pollutant within the Nakdong River, and it has led to the huge damage for many people. Next is the forest-related disasters. So this is what I call forest-related environmental disaster, and there are three types of the forest-related disaster. One of them is the forest fire. So once the fire broke out in the forest, then sometimes the smoke can be captured by the satellite in the space. And here you can see the photo taken by NASA. And you can see that there are a lot of frequent and widespread forest fires happening in North Korea. And oftentimes the border regions are also susceptible to forest fire. And if there is a forest fire happening in the border region, then it can have an impact on South Korea as well. So this is an area where we have to cooperate with North Korea for the prevention. And also if there is a massive flood, and then if the forest is not covered by lush trees, then it could cause some landmines. It could cause the landslide and the insects and pest in the forest is another important disaster that we have to pay heed to. And another area that we have to focus on is the agriculture-related disaster. So globally, especially when it comes to livestock industry, the African swine fever is a major cause of concern, and the ASF is pretty serious in North Korea as well. And for South Korea, especially around the border areas, usually the boars they become the source of infection of the African swine fever. So biosecurity is very important. So you can see that in order to control these natural disasters, we even have to control wildlife. Otherwise, this will lead to various environmental disasters as well as cause disruption in food supply. For agriculture-related disaster, aside from the disease issues among livestock, the crops and the agricultural products, again, they could be vulnerable to the pests and insects, as well as various types of the diseases. So these are all caused by the environmental disasters, and that's why we have to join our hands together with North Korea. Now let's take a look at the environmental disaster in North Korea. So there are major categories of natural disasters that happen in North Korea frequently. So from the 1990s, North Korea experienced extreme flood and drought. So North Korea's natural disasters are very serious, and also it claimed the lives of people. And in the 1990s, this extreme natural disaster in North Korea became known to the world. You know, in 1994, we experienced a very extreme heat wave, and North Korea suffered a lot of damage from that disaster. But unfortunately, even when they experienced these natural disasters as early as in the 1990s, still they experienced the repetition of the same disasters. So for example, like flood and drought. And there is a rice belt in the North Korea, but if natural disasters occur in this major agricultural region, then this will lead to food crisis and cause starvation. And again, this will cause the compromised immunity, and therefore leading to various types of diseases. And aside from flood and drought, the typhoon also takes a great toll on North Korea. Back in 2017 and 2018 and 19, as you can see, they experienced the extreme typhoons. And typhoon is now coming nowadays. Usually in the past on the Korean peninsula, the typhoon affected only the southern part of the Korean peninsula. However, because of the impact from climate change, typhoon tends to go northward more and more, further and further upward. And so nowadays, the North Korea also experiences a lot of typhoons. And so in order to respond to natural disaster, it becomes very clear that we have to deal with climate change issues as well. So in summary, we have experienced the various types of natural disasters, and many of them are caused by climate change, and these natural disasters will lead to food issues. And here you can see the natural disaster calendar in North Korea. So they have a rainy monsoon season in the summer, as well as the dry season that they suffer from drought. So when natural disasters occur in these dry and rainy seasons, then this could directly affect the food supply, which will lead to the healthcare issues in the public health. So here you can see the summary of the characteristics of disasters happening in North Korea. Not just the hydrology-related disasters such as the drought and the flood. North Korea often experiences the forest fires, the forest insects, ASF, as well as various types of the social disasters and healthcare crisis like COVID-19. So from natural disaster to social disaster, we have a very wide-ranging spectrum of disasters happening. And at a glimpse, you may think that the disasters are limited only to hydrology and the forest, but if you take a closer look at this, you can see that a lot of disasters are caused by environmental issues, and many of them are taking place in the border area. And North Korea is also working to minimize the risk of natural disasters. So compared to the past, the number of fatality and the has been declining. According to the VNR of North Korea for SDG last year, it says that they have the less fatality because of the natural disaster. But because of climate change, we now see more frequent natural disasters occurring across the world. The severity and the intensity of natural disaster has been heightened globally. Natural disasters in North Korea can also create a lot of repercussions and domino effects. For example, like if flood takes place, then it will lead to the inundation of the arable lands, which means that the food will be limited and food crisis can happen. And this could compromise the immunity of the people, and therefore people become more susceptible to infectious disease. And so this will be related with the public health care issues. And flood can also often involve the waterborne diseases. So this again could cause the health crisis. So because of these ripple effects, we have to make sure that we have to focus on the prevention of natural disasters. And the same goes for the livestock disease and air pollution. So in responding to environmental disasters, what are the areas that South and North Korea can cooperate? So for environmental disaster, I believe that there are a lot of areas that South and North Korea can join their hands. But let me first talk about why we have to cooperate. It's because when the disaster occurs, then there is an urgent need for urgent rescue and response. Yes, the international community and the UN or organizations can step in and help. However, it will take time, but South Korea is the closest neighbor of the North Korea, and therefore, when there is a situation that requires urgent response, South Korea is best positioned to help North Korea. So in this regard, I think we have to cooperate, and North and South Korea have shared the similar geographic conditions as well as the climate and environment. So that's why we have a lot of areas for cooperation. And as I said earlier, the border areas are prone to natural disasters. And when there is a disaster happening in the border area, then oftentimes it could spread to other areas and therefore directly affecting South Korea and North Korea. And here you can see the distribution of the ASF in South Korea. And usually they are spread through the wild pigs and boars. And so this shows why we have to cooperate. And as for the shared waters and shared streams, it flows from North Korea down to South Korea. So this again indicates why do you have to cooperation and joint response. Because if the disaster happens in the area surrounding the shared streams, then this could affect both South and North Korea. So here you can see that if South and North Korea join hands together to respond to natural disasters, then it will have more effective responses. And I have talked about the climate change. And climate change has been aggravating on the Korean peninsula. It is very clear and visible. And globally, we also see the worsening of climate change. According to the Korea Meteorology Service, here you can see the report on average temperature as well as the precipitation. And all of these numbers speaks for themselves that the climate change is taking place at a rapid pace, especially faster in North Korea. And precipitation is declining, but the problem is that we have very extreme cases. In other words, during the rainy season, we have a lot of heavy downpour, whereas during the non-rainy season, we have drought. And here you see the future scenario of the Korean Peninsula based on the SSP-1-2-6. And this is based on the conservative moderate scenario. But here you can see that by the time of the year 2100, global warming becomes very serious on the Korean Peninsula, and there is a massive changes in precipitation. And therefore, for the natural disasters that are caused by climate change, South and North Korea have to work together. And this is from the IPCC 6th report, and this is about the prospects for climate. And 1.5 degrees Celsius scenario here means that compared to the pre-industrialization era, let's assume that there has been the increase of the 1.9 degrees Celsius. And also here you can see the different scenarios depending on the level of temperature increase. And you can see that if the global temperature increases by 4 degrees Celsius, then you can see that there is a 4 times higher likelihood of flood and fire. And this slide shows in what areas South and North Korea should cooperate. So the natural disaster that can easily spread and that affect wide areas, as well as the disasters that could cause huge social damage, I think this is something that we have to work on. So for example, like waterborne disease, forest fire, wildlife and livestock diseases, as well as the genetic diseases. I think that these are the areas where South and North Korea should cooperate. So if that cooperation could be realized right now, then that would be ideal, but we have a lot of stumbling blocks that we have to overcome to see full swing cooperation. So in this sense, I think that we can target low-hanging fruit first. And one of the low-hanging fruit is the nature-based solution, which means that we have to use the benefit that nature gives to us, or this is what we call the ecology service. So if you have the paved areas only with the concrete, then we cannot really make the use of this ecology service. So we have to create a service where we have to create an area where the nature can serve us. So for example, like in the concrete paved road, we can create some greenery space where we can utilize the nature to respond to the natural disasters, or we can make the use of the so-called buffer function provided by nature in order to minimize the risk of natural disaster in cities. So here you can see the example of how water quality can be enhanced in marshland. So by creating the small pond and marshland, it actually serves as a great buffer for hydrology-related disasters. It can also improve the air quality and absorb a lot of pollutants. And therefore, this is the last slide. And for the responses to the natural disasters, in what areas do we have to cooperate? First of all, we have to have a consensus on the need of cooperation and joint responses to environmental disaster between South and North Korea. And based on that, we have to strengthen our capabilities to respond to natural disaster. And when it comes to natural disaster, prevention is the key. And therefore, we have to create and establish social infrastructures to prevent natural disaster. And once it occurs, then we have to have the early warning system in place in order to minimize the damage. And we also have to gear ourselves up for climate change. And we have to make the better use of ecology service that nature provides to us, so that we can not only reduce the natural disasters, but also provide so-called environmental welfare to everyone. So this is a critical task where South and North Korea should cooperate. Right now, we are facing a lot of challenges, but let us turn these challenges into opportunities. And when natural disasters occur, then everybody suffers. So this is the time when North and South Korea should strive further to cooperate, and this will lead to more trust and confidence building, and therefore providing us with the shortest cut to so-called green the tongue. And with that, I would like to conclude my presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Myung. So I'm sorry to give you only 20 minutes, and 20 minutes is such a short time. Dr. Myung has given us the characteristics of the natural disasters on the Korean Peninsula, and also restoration systems, and it should be encouraged. And also it is a very big issue, having all the complications related to the food crisis as well, because it has secondary and tertiary implications. Therefore, it is required to have the improvement of the overall system to restore the natural systems, especially nature-based solutions, which I'm not quite sure about this, what that technological aspect is, but that would be very good idea to have the means to restore the nature so that we can have the level of the preparedness overall in our society. So I look forward to very brisk discussions later on. I'd like to now invite Dr. Na from KINO, Korea Institute for National Unification. He's going to give us the more detailed discussions about the directions and tasks for establishment of South-North Korean disaster co-management system. He received a PhD degree in Seok-yeol University. He also was a research fellow at the Georgetown University. He is now a research fellow at KINO, Korea Institute for National Unification. 20 minutes, please. Thank you very much. My name is Na Yong-woo from KINO, as was introduced. First of all, allow me to express my gratitude to give me the opportunity to present this presentation. Actually, my research has started from last year, and this is one of the 3 research results that I have been doing for 3 years, and this is a reflection of my recent research result. So we have modified the research a little bit to give you the presentation today. This talks about the disaster management, but actually this is more focused on the borderline areas. We have the political demarcation between North and South Korea, but we are connected anyway, geographically and by nature. As Dr. Myung mentioned, disaster is not something that is affecting only one side of the two. It is affecting both sides. The impact scale is quite big and is getting bigger and bigger nowadays. As we all know very well, COVID-19 is also one of the issues we are experiencing together. African swine fever is also a fact that is being impacted on us with the time past. Therefore, it is only necessary for us to start our cooperation between North and South Korea in terms of the disasters. This is my agenda. As Dr. Myung has given us very clear-cut descriptions, I don't have to elaborate the introduction. Some of them can be skipped. Therefore, as mentioned, we have the new direction by this administration of Korea to have the sustainable inter-Korean relationship. We have had disruptions of the relations so far, but what can be the factor to make it sustainable for the future? What is important is to have the mutual benefit. It's not about one-sided benefit only. We both have to be benefited. Therefore, it should be win-win strategy. So in terms of the North Korean issues, we have to think of the feasibility. Therefore, disaster management can be a very good starting point of having the relationship with North Korea. So it is so-called green detente. So we have the initiative of the green detente. That includes, for example, the cooperation for the particulate matter or fine dust, and also they include some ideas of having the green related discussions and dialogues. So disaster cannot be excluded from these initiatives. So we have to improve the feasibility through many strategies. Therefore, in order to do that, we have to ask ourselves, what North Korea has been doing. So we have to know in terms of the disaster, is North Korea committed to change their systems accordingly in order to boost our cooperation? So as you see from this slide, this is up to the June 21st of 2021. According to the Rodong Shinmun, they have the editorials or news articles related to the disasters. We have selected the data. The first item was collected for the data analysis. This shows the percentage of their mentioning of the disasters or natural disasters. So by time period, we also have the analysis. The first row at the top is immediately after Kim Jong-un took power. And then, according to Rodong Shinmun articles, they talk about mostly the prevention of the disasters, and also they have the act of the disaster management. So that's lasting up to the point when they have the enactment of the Disaster Management Act in the North Korea. The second line is the day after they have the enactment of the law. So that's during the enactment period of disaster-related laws, especially for the livestock and the livestock diseases. They are emphasizing this matter very much on the newspaper. Disaster management related to livestock has been a very important focal point. And then third line is after the 7th Party Congress. That was the time when coincidentally had the global crisis of the prevention of the diseases were there. So that's also when we had the COVID-19 occurrences. So they are emphasizing on the hygiene measures, especially after the third party Congress, which is the last line. What we can find out from there is that they do have very good important policy measures on the disaster management, and they're related to mostly rivers because rivers are overflowing from time to time. The forestation is also related to that. So the management of land and water would be very important in the North Korea. Restoration is also another part that they are emphasizing continuously. And then they had a lot of issues so far with the river and lakes. So they are emphasizing the hygiene measures for these basin areas of the river and lakes. So we can have some ideas to collaborate with them in these areas. The reason why they are emphasizing the importance of the flood management and the river basin is because that's related to the agriculture product and crops. First of all, they need a lot of information. The first information they need is the climate information or meteorological data. So they have to be very sensitive to the climate change, and they are active in raising their voices in the international community as well, because they are voluntarily submitting the reports and plans for the management. Forestation is also very important, and they have to make the preparation not to cause any forest fires. It's only very natural for them to be worried about. These are the areas we can collaborate and cooperate with. And also the disease prevention is also an area where demand is very high. In more detail, this is the list of the organization chart. Under Prime Minister, they have the State Committee for Emergency Disaster Management. It's like South Korea's Safety Control Center. It's called SCEDM. Under the SCEDM, they have 6 divisions working together and in operation simultaneously. So they have some kind of structure of the organization chart. So it is not that different from our own organization in South Korea. The next thing we have to look at is how active they are in terms of making measures and putting them into practice. In 2004, they had the report of the risk management, and they are included in the index for risk management in the world. So North Korea is included in the list. On the far right, their risk level is 5.4. Just below that is 2.1. That's for South Korea. So it means that there's a big discrepancy between South and North Korea. Although they have been able to maintain the level of the risk for many years because it was not changing over time, but their ranking is 29th of the world in not being good at making good preparations. So 29th means the 29th from the bottom. So that means that they are not doing very well about this out of the 160 countries in the world. And we also have the situation where they have the act of the natural disasters. And also in South Korea, we do also have disaster prevention and restoration law. We can compare these two laws in North and South Korea. In case of South Korea, at the bottom of the screen on the left side, we have 10 chapters in the law, while North Korea has only 6 chapters. So their law is quite loose. The prevention is reflected in the North Korean's act, but it's not so detailed. So they have very lean construction of the act of the disaster and safety management. That's the area they have to elaborate more. This is the comparison of the response system of the disasters. So we also compared South and North Korea. On the left side, it's South Korea. We have the president above the other offices, National Safety Office, Secretariat Office, and Central Safety and Management Committee. On the other hand, on the right side, in the North Korea, they have the cabinet, and then they also have the SCEDMs. They have some system, but above this, there's nothing, and below that, there's only the organizations related to the central government. So they have a big loophole in the connection of the systems up to the cabinet. So that's where we can start to fill up these loopholes. If we have the experiences and limitations, I can go back to the history. It was 2007 in the Inter-Korean Summit in October when Disaster Management Cooperation was mentioned for the first time. Article 7 of the October 4th Declaration, which is for the advancement of North and South Korean relations, they mentioned that they decided to have the very active cooperation for the disaster management if disasters happen based on the fraternity love, humanitarianism, and mutual assistance. And also in 1992, in the basic agreement between the two countries, they also had the importance of the cooperation for the disasters in the intergovernmental dialogues in the Chapter 3. We can find that there can be 3 types of the cooperations of the North and South Korean cooperation for disasters. The first type is to have the preparedness and prevention before disasters happen. The second type is emergency response and relief after the case. Number 3, type 3 is post-recovery and restoration. So normally we have been talking about the recovery and restoration after the effect. So in 2004, when we had the committee meeting of the forestation, they discussed a lot of things. Of course, these ideas were not really put into practice afterwards, but they discussed a lot of cooperations, especially in type 1 for the preparedness, forest pest management, forest fire management, shared river management, and flood disasters. On the far right, on the type 3, the recovery and restoration cannot match exactly in the practices, but in 2007, we also had cooperations for the forest pest management. We also once discussed the matters related to the flood damages in 2007 as well. That is with the nature of the post management. Based off of our experiences of talking with the North, is it really possible to put that into practice? There can be triggers to inter-Korea disaster cooperation, which is increasing over time. As Dr. Myung mentioned, the frequency and scale of damages in North Korea is increasing, just like South Korea. Secondly, the damages are multiplied by new types of disasters. For example, we talked about the forest pests. The forest pests are quite common. And the worm of the forest is quite common, and also another type of new worms on the pine trees are increasing. It's coming from Siberia nowadays. So they are changing their types of the worms in the pest categories of the North Korea. But the personnel to deal with these forest pests is quite in shortage. After Kim Jong-un took power, he was very much interested in the disaster management, and he's emphasizing the importance of the scientification and technology use for such management. So it has been a while since they emphasized this importance of the technology and science for the disaster management, which I believe that can be an opportunity for us to open the dialogue with. On the other hand, there can be also the risks of the disasters, so especially around the borderline between North and South Korea. They are demilitarized zone. Therefore, they are in the military surveillance. So there's a limitation to do anything about it. The first thing that we have to deal with is to clear off the military restraints in the borderlines, and also it should not be focused on the one-time off actions only, which have been the case so far. And we have to also talk with the UN command as well in order to get the clearance in going into the area. North Korea also has the power shortages continuously, which is a very chronic issue. So that's also one restraint that we cannot fully cooperate. So this is the conclusion I would like to give you today. In what way can we really boost cooperation for the disaster management between the two Koreas? This is my own idea of having suggestions. So we probably have a building of inter-Korean disaster co-management system. Under that, we can have 5 phases and 5 strategies. So this is our ideas and plans. And as I said, this is the first research result that we have out of the 3. So this research will be continued until next year. So we are open to many comments or suggestions to change these so we can fully provide better solutions in the systems. I can just briefly talk about what they mix up. It will be very difficult or realistically impossible to realize zero disaster age in the North and South Korea. Because it's a human limitation, we cannot be 100% zero. That's why we have to have our target of minimizing the disaster damages. And also, if the disasters are happening, what is more important is to have the fast response and restoration. With the climate crisis era coming in, there are many disasters that cannot be controlled by the human beings as well. It means that it requires joint collaboration with other countries as well, not just alone inside one country. Therefore, we should have a safety community in the Korean Peninsula going back and forth the North and South Korean boundaries. In order to do that, we should have the basic principles. First of all, we should have the win-win principle through mutual cooperation. And secondly, we have to have phased integration because this cannot happen overnight. It should be phased operation principle. Third one is the international cooperation that is required. Is very important. And also we can start with the preparedness first, but once the disasters happen, we have to also have very rapid response and rehabilitation after the disasters. That's the fifth one. I can give you the specific strategies. There are 7 of them. First of all, we need a control tower to jointly respond to disasters. As Dr. Myung mentioned, this is also required by the South Korean government as well. We should not work silos amongst ministries in Korea. Because of our silo type system in the administration, we were not able to talk with the North Korea directly. Rather than Ministry of Unification, probably we can have a committee for the President of Korea. That control tower can work with or can be reported by other ministries like the Ministry of Unification or the local communities and local governments and others. And also, in order to make that happen, we should have a lot of legal systems combined together. For example, special laws can be enacted, especially for the borderline areas. Because the borderlines, as I said, are quite limited because of the DMZ, the demilitarized zone. There are so many other conflicting laws to protect the militarized zones in there. Multi-level governance is needed, and also collaboration with other countries and the international community will be needed. On the North Korean side, they have to also boost their capabilities to be self-sufficient in the disaster management. And also Dr. Myung mentioned, we need to have the restoration and inclusive recovery system, an integrated system of forecasting and warning system. I think is really needed. For the restoration, maybe I can suggest something like RDRF, the response disaster force in the border region. So that can be also a part of the fund making. So Korean disaster fund can be created in order to fund this RDRF. Last but not least, we have to put our priority on supporting vulnerable people, not the people in Pyongyang or Seoul. So we have to put the highest priority on the people in the rural areas or the remote areas because they are the most vulnerable people. So I cannot give you all the elaboration because I don't have much time. This is my proposal to you. So I talked about the control tower that we need to have. This is how we can organize that kind of control tower. We have 2 things to be put here. The first one is preparedness. The second one is the recovery after effect, ex ante and ex post. At this moment of time, North Korea is not talking to us at all, but this is at least we can do while waiting for them to talk to us. So probably we can start with the management in the borderline areas only, at least, while we're waiting for them to talk. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Na, for keeping the time limit. So you talked about the joint management system between South and North Korea. And I believe that North Korea does have urgent needs in this area, as you explained. And also there are some catalysts as well as the restricting factors that we have to overcome. While listening to your presentation, I thought that one of the basis for this issue is that we have to have a realistic view rather than abstract understanding in order to work out solutions. Currently, North Korea is under sanctions, and therefore we really have to reality check and based on the consensus between South and North Korea, as well as based on and within the legal boundaries of the two Koreas, we have to think about how to maximize our cooperation. And also you talked about the 5 major principles and 7 strategies. I think that these are very fancy for a policy report. So 5 principles and 7 strategies. Thank you very much for giving us very detailed and specific presentation. I believe that this is very helpful for our policy making. Now, with regards to these topics, we will hear from 3 discussants. First, Thomas Wierzbowski, Dr. Thomas Wierzbowski will comment on the presentations, but we are constrained by time, so I hope that you can keep your time limit of 7 minutes. Dr. Thomas Wierzbowski is the adjunct professor of the Hankuk University of Foreign Studies. Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity. My name is Thomas Wierzbowski, but I'm going to speak in English for your better communication.
So I'm Thomas, and it's my great pleasure and honor to be here. I do not know much about disasters and especially disaster management, so I learned a lot today. However, I do have this unfortunate experience of surviving flood in North Korea. I was stuck in the country. I couldn't leave because of heavy rain and flood that followed. So all bridges in Najin-Sonbong area in so-called Rajin Economic Zone were destroyed. Roads were washed away. So I was trying to reach the nearest international airport, which was in Yenji, Yangon province. So I was walking to the border, looking at all those disastrous developments. And I thought, like, gee, if this is all the way to Yenji, then it's going to be tough. But the moment I crossed Tuman River, it was actually okay in China, and I was able to take a cab to the airport. So my first impression was why North Korea was so heavily affected by this heavy rain, and China was okay. So my first thought I would like to share with you is lack of basic infrastructure or the quality of existing infrastructure in North Korea. Roads, bridges are of very poor quality, very old. They are lacking not only heavy equipment like excavators, but also very simple tools, shovels, sandbags, pumps, generators. They do not have it. So before talking and before thinking about systematic solutions of disaster management, we have to keep in mind and we have to solve very dire and very poor economic performance and almost non-existing infrastructure in North Korea, outside Pyongyang, of course, in rural areas, areas that are the most affected by climate change, by floods, and so on. It's like we cannot plug a notebook into a medieval electric grid, okay? So we really have to start from the very scratch of providing simple equipment and simple solutions to very basic needs. My second thoughts, and I know Dr. Na mentioned the need for internationalization of all the efforts. Allow me to be a black sheep here in this room because somebody has to say it. It takes 2 to tango, and they do not want to dance. There is no willingness. There is no will within North Korean leadership and decision makers to cooperate. In management, disasters, in disaster management, in all other areas, they don't want to work together with South Korea. They shot and killed Korean citizens last year. They blew up the only communication channel, the liaison office in Gaeseong last year. Recently, they have been demolishing the most symbolic icon of inter-Korean cooperation, which was the Hyundai resort in Kimgang Mountains. We must keep in mind, we have to face the reality that they just do not want to cooperate with South Korea. there is no cooperation, there is not even a dialogue between the two. Now, having said that, third thought I would like to share, to be a little bit more constructive and not so pessimistic, how to overcome this problem. Dr. Na mentioned it briefly. I would like to extend this idea of multilateral arrangement. Every time I hear inter or bilateral, then I think, why not to go further into multilateral arrangement? Why not to engage China, Russia, Japan? These problems affect all the countries. Why not to use international multilateral infrastructure to engage them in this more complex arrangement? Use existing international governmental organizations, UN and so on. Use NGOs, use private sector. Climate change and combating climate change is on the very top of agendas of many organizations and many stakeholders. Why not to use them? Internationalization of the current issues in the Korean Peninsula is a very practical way how to solve pending issues. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you for being punctual as well. Dr. Tomasz Biezafowski said that he himself experienced the lack of infrastructure when he visited North Korea. So it is really inevitable for them to make up for their loophole of the infrastructure. He also is experienced with many other countries' experiences in Europe and many other East European countries. So he emphasized the importance of the international cooperation to boost the inter-Korean relationship further. So we're very much welcoming your ideas of having these new input. So we welcome your very good idea and really hope that we can have some reality put into there as well. So this is a very valuable opinion. Now moving on to, we would like to have another discussant, Professor Yoo Jae-im. He's a researcher at SNU Engineering Environmental Planning Institute. He's also a researcher at the Engineering and Environmental Research and also SNU. 7 minutes, please. Thank you very much. My name is Yoo Jae-shim. Very much pleased to be here and honored to be a part of this important session. Personally, it's very meaningful. I also believe that I have been learning a lot from these two presentations. While listening to them, I myself, as a resident in the city of Seoul, I feel the impact of the disasters, and I cannot avoid any disasters in this kind of urban setting as well, because we are part of the global community and the whole planet is experiencing the disasters. So we are in the middle of having the risks of disasters and natural issues. North Korea, of course, is also part of such risks to have such natural disasters over and over again. And we are now here to talk about the ways to find solutions and cooperation between the two Koreas. So thank you very much for these two presentations. While you were having two different topics and themes, I was able to sense that our directions are one way and we are sharing where we are going in terms of the direction. So we have our disasters and we talk about the mend of the approaches and collaborations. And if we just have a back and forth communications with them, we can propose first and we can receive their responses and then we can move on to the next step. This is kind of our idea for making proposals to them. So probably we can combine these two presentations together because these two presentations by these two experts were having quite common things. Now, I'm here to talk about what is common between the two edges of common thread. And then also I'd like to add what is the common thing between North and South Korea. Also, whether North Korea will be responding to us in terms of our proposals or not, we can also have our own calculus to know what their reactions will be. I believe that these two presenters have designated one area for starting our cooperation. That is borderline areas or border regions. Because border regions between North and South Korea are sharing the same characteristics of both countries, and that is connected to each country. And that is also the areas where both North and South Korea can experience the impact of the disasters and climate change. Since our approach is based on the climate crisis, our responses are also based on how solutions can be made by both countries in a very formal way. If you read my discussion point paper, you can read what my ideas are. But instead of just reading out my paper, I'd like to now talk about something else. This summer in Seoul, as you recall, we had the big flash flood. Everybody was just calling each other to see if anything bad happens to your beloved person. In this kind of developed city of Seoul, we have to still deal with these natural things, natural disasters. On the other hand, in North Korea, they have not developed their infrastructure. And because of the lack of infrastructure, they are also experiencing a lot of disasters. But in South Korea, even if we have our infrastructure, our impact feels big and bigger. And we have the same causes for the disasters. But our responses are different in North and South Korea. As a solution to make us common thing, some presenters suggested nature-based approaches, nature-based solutions. For example, we can talk about the restorations of the 4 major rivers in Korea, and also the impervious areas in Gangnam area, which has almost 100% of impervious area, can be restored by having the solutions with the rainfalls coming down onto the underground. That's one solution we can find in South Korea. On the other hand, in North Korea, landslide and the deforestation were the main focal points of their disasters up until recently. But that deforestation and the landslides have been going down in the number of the cases so far. As you feel now, there's no news carried about these 2 incidents anymore. And they were able to make the solutions to these landslide issues with natural means for the last 10 years, not with the technology or science. So I believe that they were able to successfully prevent landslides and the deforestation issues as I witnessed so far. So in the North Korea, what they are doing as a focal point is to have the prospect plan for the land and water management. In this plan, they are connecting land and water at the same time so that they can solve the 2 issues at a time, the landslide and the water overflow. So I believe their policy is aiming at having 2 birds in 1 stone. Likewise, we also have our challenge to have the restoration of the river while working on the land as well. I know that North Korea is stricken by the shortage of materials, but they have the good idea of connecting land and water together using the natural means, and also they have to continue to do that. So if we combine these 2 solutions or approaches together between North and South Korea, I just suggest that we can have a Korean Peninsula platform to deal with the natural disasters. Also at the same time, we can have the joint collaboration on the international community, having the preparedness for the climate change. We have to be able to look out further into the future for the unification or dialogues, but we also have to set our eyes on to the medium and short-term progress as well, let's say for the next 5 years. So In the 10-year plan for the land and water management in North Korea, they have used their appropriate level of technology, not the high advanced technology, but appropriate science and technology based on their own economic status. So they have been working very well appropriately. In that situation, what can we do for them? Probably we can provide some cement for their construction, and then the rest will be taken care of by the North Korean people. So when we see that North Korea is adopting appropriate level of technology, we can say that although they are not with the highest level of technology or advanced level of the knowledge to deal with the issues, they have some level of the appropriate technology. If they want to advance their level of technology, we have to meet more often. We have to work harder together. So that's what I sensed from their level of technology in the meetings. We ourselves in South Korea have our systems ready, but North Korea is really stricken by the lack of other materials and resources. What they need is kind of priming water so that they can work on more independently. So all we have to do is to provide the initial offer of some materials that they should start with. And then afterwards, maybe after 5 years, we can also have a joint system to have cooperation. So what is important is to start having the foundation of cooperation, and that is my biggest wish. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Based on the actual experience of intercurrent exchange programs and her own personal visit to North Korea, she talked about some practical solutions to induce cooperation from North Korea. I think that was very practical proposal, and so like establishing the ecology restoration platform between the two Koreas. I think this is something that we can work on together with North Korea. The last discussant is the Dr. Seok-yeol. And Dr. Seok-yeol, he graduated from the Korea University, and currently he is working as a research fellow at the Institute for National Security Strategy. So Dr. Ho, the microphone is yours. As introduced, I am Oh Il-seok from the Institute for National Security Strategy. I actually majored in law, but I'm not called by the Ministry of Justice, rather the Ministry of Unification, and I'm honored to be invited. Our company experienced the environmental disaster recently when there was a heavy flood in the Gangnam area, and I was almost locked in within the office. So that was my personal experience of how extreme and drastic the environmental disaster could be. So North Korea is under the UN sanction, and also because of the COVID crisis, they are suffering from severe economic crisis. In year 2020 and year 2016, they experienced the autumn typhoon, which caused inundation of the roads and the railways as well as the arable lands, which aggravate the difficulties in food crisis and housing shortages. Chairman Kim Jong-un, during the Workers' Party convention, he mentioned that we have to review the areas prone to typhoon, and also he personally ordered the mobilization of the military forces for the restoration activities. And in that regard, I believe that the Dr. Myung and Dr. Na gave us very good proposals for the cooperation in terms of the environmental disaster management and joint management system for natural disasters. Dr. Myung talked about the environmental disaster and the range of the cooperation for effective responses to environmental disaster between the two Koreas, as well as the strengthening of the natural ecology service. So I agree with this, but I believe that among the cooperation tasks that you suggest, if we could set the priorities, then we will be able to have the better implementation. For example, in year 2009, because of the unapproved discharge of the Hwanggang Dam in North Korea, the 9 people got killed, and also the recent heavy downpour increased the possibility of the illegal or unauthorized discharge. And for this, I think the South and North Korea have to cooperate, and we have to establish a system that makes sure that the report is made before the discharging of the dam from North Korea. And also the dredging as well as the dam reinforcement for North Korean stream, we can provide some humanitarian aid and support. So this is something that we can work on. Dr. Na talked about how to identify the needs of the cooperation for natural disaster management in North Korea, and also he suggested the direction for inter-Korean cooperation in natural disaster management. In particular, he talked about the joint management system and 7 major strategies, as well as the launching of the joint management committee, and I completely agree with that. But in order to have a sort of the legal binding effect for the establishment of the joint management committee, I think information sharing between the two Koreas will be critical, which may take time and also could be a very, very difficult process to go through. And also, in order to establish the disaster management system, then information sharing system is critical. So we have to think about how to build this in order to ensure the actual implementation. And also for information sharing, based on the various examples, previous examples of the inter-Korean cooperation projects, I think terminology is important. So we have to harmonize the terms. And even between South and North Korea, oftentimes we use different terms for the same meanings. So the harmonization of terminology is critical. And also the responses to natural disaster will lead to investment in infrastructure as well as the housing support. And in fact, one of the discussants talked about the dire situations in North Korea for infrastructure and how much we have to support them. So this is the one issue that we can work on. And also to be prepared for natural disaster. Yes, you suggested the establishment of the joint management committee, but this will require the movement of the materials, equipment, as well as the human beings. So this may require some consultation with the UN command. And you also talked about the establishment of the law on the cooperation of the natural disaster in the border area. And because I have a PhD in law, I was particularly interested in this part. And in fact, I thought whether we really have to have this law, and I thought that we don't really have to limit the area for this law to border area only. So we can think about establishing a special law and for the inter-Korean cooperation in disaster management. And according to the Science and Technology Basic Law, it actually has a clause that stipulates the necessity of inter-Korean cooperation. So maybe we can introduce the similar clause into the law. So the environmental disaster as well as the natural disaster cooperation, I think these are the areas where North Korea can accept more easily than other areas, and they're very likely to be exempt from UN sanctions. So I hope that these cooperation could work as a catalyst for broader inter-Korean cooperation. And with that, thank you very much. Thank you, Dr. Oh. So you said that the North Korea is very likely to accept the South Korea's offer for environmental disaster cooperation, and you also talked about the importance of setting priorities for various tasks to ensure implementation. You also talked about the issues of the communication and cooperation with the UN command as for the actual and practical issues, and also you pointed out some needs for legal aspect and the enactment of the law. Thank you very much for great feedback and comment. At the beginning, I forgot to mention this, so I'm not quite sure how active the YouTube participants are. For the online participants, you can scan the barcode to leave your questions. So if you do have any question, then please scan the barcode that you received and leave the questions there. Are there any questions from online? So I'm sorry for not making this announcement at the beginning. We have heard from 3 discussants so far, and they gave us very good feedback and comment. But please do not try to respond and answer to every question that was raised. Because of the time constraint, we may have to focus on some of the key questions only. So Dr. Myung and Dr. Na, I will give you 3 minutes for response. So please make the best use of the 3 minutes allocated. And we have a question from the floor as well. Yes, so please identify your name and your affiliation before asking the question. I am from the Korea Environmental Corporation, and my name is Kim Chang-yong. And I have been in the environmental issues for more than 2 decades. I don't have a question. But I'd like to make some comment because I have worked on this issue for a long time as well. So I'd like to share with you my personal comment. And I believe that because you will work as the advisors for policy, for policymakers, I would like to make this comment. I have been thinking about this exchanges and cooperation for environmental issues for a long time, and I reviewed a lot of data. But as for the environmental cooperation and the realities in North Korea, which is now at the brink of the survivor and trying to secure the regime stability with the nuclear weapons, so in that situation, how realistic we can have the environmental cooperation with North Korea? For a long time, the renowned scholars have come up with all kinds of implementation methods and how to put them into practice, but many of them fail to be implemented, and they just remain as rhetorics. Why? It's because despite the urgency of the environmental issues, if they are not linked with the military issues or the economic issues, then we cannot make a progress at all. This is a reality. As mentioned by Dr. Thomas, we have to internationalize these issues. I think this is very critical, and we actually worked with the international organizations like the UN, NGO, to internationalize the issues, but oftentimes our efforts went down the drain. Why? So yesterday, I participated in the KGFP, and my impression is that political situations happen and change all the time, and there is a change of the government in South Korea. And so I think that the environmental issues also have to be updated and catch up with changes in the dynamics surrounding the Korean Peninsula. So I think that we have to constantly catch up with the trend and change the agenda. I think that was a very, very important comment. Thank you very much.
To save our time, please give him the microphone. Without microphone, translation cannot be provided.
Korea as a visiting professor at the Hanguk University of Foreign Studies. Well, I mean, I know the time is an issue here. So I just want to, because we are talking about cooperation, so I also think that it's important to, along with the meeting of capacity in terms of, it's also in terms of, to have cooperations, it's also important to have matching or meeting of expectations. So I was just wondering about what is the North Korean expectations about inter-Korean relations, cooperation, particularly in this. So could you please elaborate it about, because I mean that I think it's also an important aspect. I mean what the North Korea actually expects from South Korea in terms of in this particular, because it also applies to other areas of cooperation. So if you could elaborate, thank you.
예, 고맙습니다. 지금 방금 질문해 주신 거 북한 쪽에서 원하는
Well, thank you very much. Now, what is the expectation by the North Korea? We have to have the fathoming of such expectations so that we can be able to develop other areas of cooperation in the future. That is a very good idea as well. So if you have answers to that question as well, I'd like to ask presenters to answer together. So I'll give you each 1 minute and 30 minutes. And I'm very sorry to give you a shorter time than expected.
Thank you very much for a comment and both from the discussants and floor. I'll be very brief. So all our discussions here today, I think this is all about the joint responses to environmental disasters by the two Koreas. And if the inter-Korean dialogue resumes, then I think we have to set the priority for the agenda and seek avenues of cooperation. And when it comes to the disasters, there are several international treaties like UNSDR and the Climate Change Convention, and it talks about the climate change adaptation and mitigation. And North Korea is already participating in these international norms and conventions. So I think that there are some areas that we can work on to promote cooperation with North Korea to reduce natural disasters. And with regards to what North Korea wants from South Korea, I'm not really in the right position to talk about this, but if you look at the reports published by North Korea, you can see that they are highly interested in expanding capabilities and reduce for natural disaster response. And they actually ask for international aid for that. And we already have several cooperations. So we can start from these areas. So although we are under difficulty, we have to think about what is feasible even under this sanction. And based on that, I think we can earn trust and we can pursue green deduct and open the avenue of dialogue and cooperation.
Dr. Na, please. I don't have much time to talk more in detail. I'll be just talking about the essential ones only. As Dr. Yu mentioned, the difference between North and South Korea, and that is the reason why I suggested the complementarity between North and South Korea, and that is also very much feasible. And I learned a lot from Dr. Yu saying that short-term result is also important as much as the longer-term horizon. Roadmaps and visions are important, but if we have the shorter-term result, we can also elicit the consensus of the general public. So we should not always look out to the farther future. We have to be able to look at the short-term and medium-term as well. So I agree with you. And also, I can give you my own example. If we have special law, the special law can precede other laws as well. That is the reason I thought of special law. But if you look at the 6th development plan, they have also the new agenda. And that gears toward this North Korea as well as South Korea. If we have the integrated platform to accommodate the two countries in such a enactment, it doesn't have to be in the form of special law at all. So I can just make way for that. So sustainability is really important, and what North Korea wants, as their expectation, is to have the guarantee of their survival of the regime. So they want their sustainability. One thing we should avoid our trap is that we were thinking of the good days only when we have the relationship with North Korea. We only have our memory of good days, but we have our bottom level of the relationship in the North Korea now. That doesn't mean that they do not have any intention of talking to us at all and for permanently. We can always find ways to start our discussions. Even if they have the fourteenth launch of the missiles, we should talk with them because we don't know when they can really change their mind to talk to us. So we have our expectation like that.
지적해 주신 대로
As the person on the floor mentioned, the environmental cooperation, I think it is also linked with the nuclear and military issues. And also it is related with the peace regime and the normalization of inter-Korean relations. So we have to have these diverse tracks of dialogue, and also we have the other agenda for inter-Korean cooperation. As you could see from the Helsinki process, we actually have to deal with all these issues together simultaneously rather than focusing on one single issue. So the military and the denuclearization issues, these are also related with the environmental cooperation and economic issues. Unless we have this umbrella network or the comprehensive way to deal with all these different topics all together, we will not be able to have the full swing cooperation. In particular, we have to identify the areas where North Korea needs the most and what North Korea wants to foster cooperation. And in fact, the environment and natural disaster, it's something that North Korea urgently needs. But the problem is that they are not heavily reliant on South Korea, and they don't want aid from South Korea in this matter. They want assistance from international organizations. But South Korea has to find out what kind of roles it can play to promote cooperation with North Korea. So we have had a lot of discussions as well as very practical suggestions. So in this slide, I believe we really made a very efficient use of 90 minutes allotted for us. We had a very informative sessions as well as very good suggestions for policy making. As we said earlier, North and South Korea are now in a very strained relations, and it's difficult to restore trust. But we have to continue to engage and make efforts so that we can make a contribution to the prosperity and peace on the Korean Peninsula. Once again, I would like to thank the Dr. Myung and Dr. Na, work as presenters, as well as the Dr. Thomas, Dr. Yu, and Dr. Oh. Thank you very much for all your contribution. And this will conclude our session organized by the South and North Korea Exchanges and Cooperation Support Association. Thank you very much.